Thank you all for coming here tonight. I'm Laura Blum, Director of Program Development here, and I'm delighted to recognize some of the faces from part one of our Cyber mini-series, which featured William Gibson and Jack Womack. Jack's back with us again tonight. Good to have you here. Tonight is the second and final episode starring Agrippa, A Book of the Dead, Gibson's withering computer disk story of the withering of his father. In the best Brechtian tradition, we have exposed the seams of our set, a Mac PowerBook 180, interfaced with a high 8 video, a Sony VPH 1041Q, and a BNC connector. I have trouble with can openers, but one of the boons of this whole project is that I now hurl around words like Radius Power View and LCD panel, as if I owned them. When the Kansas City Agrippa site called last week to share panics, I coolly said that I was contemplating using our Sony projector with a CGD monitor hooked up to a 9-pin connector, and specifically a SY9M part 2603904, which, for those of you who don't know, is a 9-pin connector to 4 BNC connectors. Now I'll turn the evening over to people who really know what they're talking about. The flow of the evening is that Kevin Begos, publisher of Agrippa and other limited edition art books, will first discuss the project with Karen Benfield, associate producer with the Wall Street Journal television report. And then, in the spirit of disembodied texts, you'll hear the disembodied voice of Penn Jillette of Penn and Teller, Magic Performance Duo, in a pre-recorded reading of Agrippa as it scrolls on the screen. Kevin will be back for questions afterwards. And finally, we'll drink to postmodernity amidst Agrippa designer Dennis Ashbaugh's DNA portrait paintings upstairs. Please join me in welcoming Kevin Begos and Karen Benfield.
But to start off, maybe you can explain to us, or give us at least a little context for the very distressed looking limited edition book that we see outside that is pricey, has DNA art in it, and will corrupt itself.
I guess the real background of it starts with William Gibson's and Dennis Ashbaugh's friendship. They met about 3 years ago at a Barcelona art fair and spent the days getting drunk together and going around looking at Gaudi buildings at night. And they wanted to collaborate on a project then, but neither of them had any idea what to do. They just sort of talked about it and knocked it around. And it's a strange thing for artists and writers to do things together because most contemporary artists don't want to illustrate a book. They're bored with that. But then when you get into abstraction, it's much harder to make it come together with a writer's text. So about 1.5 years ago, kind of through chance, I met Dennis and he told me about their ideas, and I suggested this book that destroys itself after one reading. And Dennis's DNA codes and the distressed look of the book kind of evolved around the story that Gibson wrote, which, to my surprise, in the beginning was a very personal thing. It didn't have anything much in common with any of his other cyberspace books. It wasn't about computers. It wasn't about the future, really. It was all about his family past and about time.
Isn't the idea of Agrippa, once we read the story, it's gone forever, isn't it an electronic book, which I guess this is kind of an unusual way to present a remembrance about one's father? I mean, that's usually reserved for bestsellers like Shakespeare and Company.
I think so, but again, it ties into how fleeting Gibson's memory of his father was. He died when he was very young, and so most of his experiences and remembrances are from photo albums. That's what Agrippa was, by the way, was a Kodak brand of photo album made about between 1915 and 1920. And Gibson discovered this old photo album in his family's house in West Virginia last summer when he went back to visit. So he was really tailoring this idea of something that's gone after an initial exposure to it, to how fleeting memories are and family experiences.
Is, I guess one of the conundrums that people kick around when they talk about Agrippa is whether it's an art book, a limited art book that's meant to be hoarded and kept, or a text that's meant to be experienced, in that kind of way.
That's, I think, one of the things that Gibson and Dennis and I are proudest of, is that we've kind of stuck to our guns with that. Several museum curators and collectors have expected exceptions to be made to an edition of Agrippa. If the museum bought it, of course I would give them a disc that didn't self-destruct. And I said, well, of course I can't give you a disc that won't self-destruct. And several of the museums actually backed out of it at that point because it presented such a curatorial problem. I mean, what do you do with it if a patron comes in and asks to read it? And if by letting them read it, it's no longer the thing you cataloged because the story doesn't exist. So we were aware of that from the start, and that we kind of take pride in that mischievous aspect of it. But it really, it depends on how you approach it. If you take it very seriously as a collectible that's going to be worth a fortune, then you're entering into sort of the realm of contemporary art, which is the worst side of it anyway. Anybody who goes into buying artwork, sure that it's going to go up and be worth a fortune in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years is crazy, because there's never been any way to predict it. And anybody that tells you that they have the answers to what contemporary art is going to be collectible, they're just lying.
But in that way, Agrippa, I guess, is kind of a sure thing, because if everybody uses their Agrippa, eventually there will be only one Agrippa text left, so it's definitely worth the most.
No, nobody may care. They get lost. Theoretically, you're right, but if it went up for auction at Sotheby's or Christie's in 20 years, most people wouldn't realize it, but in fact the computer operating system that this was made from would be so archaic that you would have to hire a technical crew to reconstruct such primitive computer language. You would probably spend more on finding an antique like a Mac PowerBook 180 and reconstructing System 7 in 20 years than the book itself cost. So.
But that question addresses the idea of what kind of audience Agrippa is for. Is it for the collector? Is it for the hackers who want to post it on the bulletin board? What audience did you have in mind?
I knew from the start that it was going to be a much more diverse audience than a lot of other books I do, that Gibson's fans would mostly be interested in the disc itself, that the art world people would understand the concept but wouldn't be interested in playing it because it might decrease the value. Because of some of the press the book's gotten, there have been some other people who just called because they thought it was a neat idea, people who've never read Gibson or normally didn't collect books, who were sure that this was a perfect collectible. So it's been a wide range of.
And has it attracted a breed of hacker that's just so anxious to break the encryption code?
They seem most anxious to brag about breaking the encryption code on bulletin boards. They've made various attempts to get hold of it, but nobody's gotten hold of it yet.
Do you think this project is a book, or is it a new kind of book called an electronic book, or is it just a piece of art just meant to be experienced and then that's it?
I think of it as juxtaposing the most traditional book aspects with the electronic book, because the bindings of that book and the rag paper and the letterpress printing and the copperplate etchings are all basically manufacturing processes that are about 400 or 500 years old and haven't changed much since then. And the electronic part of it is really only 10 or 15 years old at most. And I know people in both those groups, people who believe in hypertext and completely in computers, and that's all they're interested in, and they think that's the whole future. And then I know a lot of traditional book people who who hate computers and are horrified that I even published a book like this. But really both sides have things to learn.
Do you think as far as electronic books go that text has a different meaning if you experience it in a different way? I mean, when we watch it tonight and it goes by us, will it be a different experience than reading?
I hadn't thought that in the beginning, but actually every time I see a proof of, or showing someone, this disc with Agrippa or proofreading or anything like that, it is a different experience looking at it on a computer screen. It seems a little harder to get a hold of. It's not like sitting in bed with a book, and it's not as personal as that, as holding it. It's much more fleeting.
Do you think this idea, this way of publishing will catch on? Are people willing to give up the sensual physical contact with paper and all the reading rituals that we have for books that go by us on the screen?
I think screens and computers have a long way to go. I mean, that may only be 10 years, or 6, 8, 10 years, but it could even be 20. I don't think they'll eliminate books, but the computer people have a lot to do before even this, which is the state of the art now. It's basically a big bulky thing that you wouldn't want to carry around with you on the subway or to the beach or anything like that.
But is the idea of a computer bulletin board or an electronic medium, is that conducive to collaborations like Dennis and Bill's?
Most of the other collaborations I've seen, and you wrote about some of them actually, we joked about them after you did a separate article, a lot of the hypertext things seem not to measure up to the idea that theoretically you have a computer story, like a mystery, that the reader can choose at a certain point whether you pull the trigger or what happens or who gets killed. And that sounds fine conceptually, but most of the pieces that have been done just, I guess, aren't good enough writing to pull it off. So I think it's a challenge to writers too, because in a way computers can be very easy to work with, and things like hypertext or a self-destructing book, you can get the idea and you can do the program without that much difficulty or money, but it does really come back to the writing.
Do you think that after this, Bill's going to have any interest in writing again for the electronic medium? Or
He doesn't seem to. They're going to bring out some of his other books that have already been written on electronic disc. I think they're bringing out Neuromancer, which in the next year or two. As far as writing something specifically for electronic medium, I think he'll be kind of cautious with that.
But as a publisher yourself, there has to be a certain charm in publishing a book this way, because you can reach, if this book tonight gets posted on electronic bulletin boards around the country, you've reached a huge audience, maybe bestseller potential, by really only printing 75 copies at different price ranges, right?
That's true, but the flip side of it is that I won't get a penny from any of those postings on bulletin boards, and neither will Gibson and neither will Ashboss. So I've basically given a free read to all those people, which we knew from the start. But I've discovered that too, that when it hits the bulletin boards, there's really no way to know. There's no counting how many people will get it. The computer virus that was launched a couple of years ago by Robert Morris up at Cornell University that made national headlines and shut down a lot of computer systems. His actual goal was not to create a virus, but was to create a program that determined the limits of internet and how many different places there were and how fast it took information to go from one place to another. He was basically trying to throw a ball out and see how long it took to bounce back. And unfortunately, he made an error in his program, and it multiplied rapidly and sort of became a virus that destroyed a lot of information. But he was actually just trying to figure out what happens when you send something out on the internet, and how fast does it go places, and how many people get it, and how do you determine who read it?
And there's no way.
Not really, no.
Wasn't one of the rumors that, Agrippa's been riddled with rumors, but wasn't one of the rumors that Agrippa was actually one big encryption program designed to bring down everyone's...
Yeah, it was in the beginning it was referred to as a logic bomb, which is a program that can be written and hidden in a data bank, and at a certain day or minute it goes off and starts multiplying incredibly rapidly. And it multiplies so rapidly that it fills up every entire byte of space in any computer system and shuts the whole thing down. And there have been a couple of cases of corporate threats of espionage of disgruntled employees who have tried to plant logic bombs things. And Agrippa never was a logic bomb, but someone out at Stanford, I think, speculated that it had certain elements that made him think that's what it was.
Well, this is probably something that every 15-year-old hacker in California is trying to figure out now, but what is the kind of encryption code that you've used?
It's pretty straightforward, but it's called, it's based on an RSA algorithm, which is a mathematical system that basically takes the data and breaks it up into completely abstract, not even letters or numbers anymore. And it's used mostly by people like the National Security Agency and banks for wire transfers, for highly secure data transfers. And what we discovered with Agrippa is, while the government has protected these sorts of things very closely for years in the banking industry too, is that in fact computing power has grown so much that it's very available. It's pretty easy for a 17-year-old or a 20-year-old with a higher math background to put together this kind of algorithm, whether it's for protecting data, or in this case, we basically made a one-way thing. Normally you would encrypt something so that it started out encrypted at one end and went, say, overseas to London or to Paris to a particular branch, and you would need a key to decrypt it. So Agrippa, instead of, it has no key. It's a one-way encryption that takes the readable text as each line scrolls by and just puts it in that encrypted form with no way to recall it.
You got a message tonight from Bud Cook in Ontario, who had a lot of questions. Can you tell us a little bit about the message?
It caused a brief panic here to Laura and people downstairs. I guess it came in about 5 o'clock. And Bud Cook is probably not his name, but the gist of the message was that there was a virus on the transmission program, and I had to call him to reset modem numbers and change the terminal program so that this would all go through, and that if I didn't, the whole thing would collapse. And what that probably was a hacker, maybe in Ontario, maybe even here in New York, who was trying to find out what incoming phone lines this thing was happening here to get information, because in fact, since we're running it off a computer disk, which some people were disappointed by, and said, oh, you're not transmitting. Well, part of that was because I had realized from the beginning that we put up this big flag, basically, of saying there's going to be a transmission at a certain date, and hackers have been threatening to attack it for months. And my attitude and Bill's attitude was kind of, well, we're not going to make it that easy for you. Because they just thought that all they would have to do was get onto a particular bulletin board or a particular phone line and intercept the data. But what they forgot, and this goes straight into things that come out of like spy novels and money scams and things like that, is if you never give someone an opportunity to capture the data, if you never use the phone lines, they're completely out in the dark. There's nothing they can do, because what we're operating off here now is, a completely secure system. So there will be a transmission, but this was just someone trying to get some information about it that they could use. That's what I think, anyway.
That must be pretty gratifying, though, in a way, that you've pushed enough buttons in people that they're that curious about one book, one story.
Yeah, some of the other things on the internet were the Thinking Machines group in Cambridge, which is a pretty seriously funded and state-of-the-art computer programming group specializing in encryption. They've been bragging for some time that they were going to capture this code and break it apart. And people out at Stanford, too, at the supercomputing faculty there, have been saying that for months. So, yeah, we enjoyed that.
I guess one thing that we haven't talked about while we've been talking about sort of high technology issues are Dennis Ashbow's contributions to the book. How do they fit into the drawings that recede and change and make every book different?
That goes back to Dennis and Bill's friendship, and Bill was fascinated by these abstract representations that when we go upstairs later, you all will see them. They aren't on the computer disk, but they were inspired by scientific DNA scans, which are now also being used in criminology to try and prove who did a particular crime. Dennis, about 6 years ago, had a collector who desperately wanted a portrait made by Dennis. And Dennis said, I've been an abstract painter all my life. I've never painted a portrait, and I'm never going to. But he really actually wanted, this person wanted to buy a painting, and of course he wanted to make the sale. And he ended up agreeing to take a piece of hair, a hair sample from the person, and get a DNA scan and to base an abstract painting on the positions that came back from that DNA scan. And from there it evolved into just making abstract works. But the way they tie into Gibson's story is that Agrippa is all a play on a personal family album that, you know, if you're looking back to your father or your grandfather or people you didn't know, you're basically trying to reconstruct this past that you didn't have. That's what Bill was trying to do. And Bill and Dennis had this kind of wild idea at the beginning that Agrippa was a photo album from 20 or 30 years in the future, where instead of Kodak snapshots, you would have DNA codes of your ancestors or your gene pool or something like that, and that you could, you know, sit in bed at night and call them up on the computer. And in Gibson's books too, that line is played off of what happens if you have the entire human genetic genome in 20 or 30 years, but it really was in a computer form. Could you reconstruct a personality? I mean, would it be a person, or would it just, what would it be? So that's, Dennis has been exploring those issues.
So we have drawings or etchings that mutate and distort over time, depending on how they're exposed to light. And we have this text that's very evanescent. It's going to be like it's going by sometimes weird. So one last thing before we watch it, I guess, would be, what can we expect from this kind of shared reading experience? We're going to share this very intimate story all together, and it's going to go by very fast. And in a week, we'll remember differently than we did tonight. So what can we expect?
I think the interesting thing will be if people, you know, ones or twos ever talk about this in different places. And some people saw it at the American Society, some at the kitchen, some people bought the book, some people heard about a rumor. Everybody will have slightly different memories. Some people will remember a particular passage of the book. Other people will have forgotten that and will dispute that it ever existed, which is kind of like any memory people have. But it's very hard to get a hold of the past. So I think in that sense, the whole notion that Agrippa has destroyed itself, Bill summed it up by saying it's really just transferred itself from computer memory, which is just based a crude human memory, into everybody's memory who hears it here or sees it in any form. So it's not really destroyed, it's just playing on different kinds of memories.
Okay, I guess we're ready to watch it. That's okay.
I actually have a practical question. Just on the art dealing side, how many have you sold?
It's almost sold out in the deluxe edition. There's still there are 350 copies of the cheaper edition. So there are a fair number of those left. And we may be doing a Japanese edition too. But you kind of want, with books like this, you want to sell a certain number and then have them available, you know, over the next few years. I mean, I know both Gibson and Dennis are holding on to their personal copies, you know, their artist-proof copies. They have no intention of selling them for the time being.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Kill 5 minutes, so if you want to get up and just walk around.
We ask questions, right?
Sure. You want to take?
First of all, how many deluxe editions are there, and what are the other editions that you have?
There are 95 copies of that edition out there, and then another edition of 350 copies.
90 and how much will the 350 sell for? What format do they have?
It's just a smaller format of the book with reproductions of the etchings and in a cloth and a shell box, and those are $500.
Those are 500 each.
Right.
And the deluxe editions
Are 15.
15. It wasn't clear when you said, when you were talking about telephone lines, are we getting this off of the disc, or is this?
This particular thing here is coming right off that disc.
Okay, then there's no transmission system.
Not to here.
Any place else is in there?
Yeah.
Oh, there are transmissions, so that's what's in there.
Yeah.
Aha, okay.
They're happening presently?
Excuse me?
These transmissions are happening presently?
At 7:30 they start.
7:30. And where are they going out to exactly?
To bulletin boards, not to the actual sites, not to Kansas City or Tallahassee or the kitchen or to the American Society here.
And what about Australia? I was told there was a transmission to Australia.
Originally, we had a friend, yes, who wanted to get it at her parents' farm in the outback, but the logistics didn't work out.
So for this is Tallahassee and
Kansas City.
And Kansas City.
Yeah.
This too is in the Brechtian tradition.
Before untying the bow that bound this book together, a black book. Before untying the bow that bound this book together, a black book, albums. C.A. Agrippa, order extra leaves by letter and name. A Kodak album of time-burned black construction paper. The string he tied has been unraveled by years and the dry weather of trunks. Like a lady's shoestring from the First World War, its metal furls eaten by oxygen until they resemble cigarette ash. Inside the cover, he inscribed something in soft graphite, now lost. And his name, William F. Gibson, Jr., and something, comma, 1924. Then he glued his Kodak prints down and wrote under them in chalk-like white pencil, Papa's Sawmill, August 1919. Yes? No, we can't. We've already started. We can't go back. Did you get that first part on tape? Well, then we can go back and do it. We can edit this out too. We sure are. We're okay. No, we're okay. Well, do you want to start again? Okay, let's go. Let's keep going, then we can always go back and start again. Then he glued his Kodak prints down and wrote under them in chalk-like white pencil, Papa's Sawmill, August, 1919. A flat-roofed shack against a mountain ridge. In the foreground are tumbled boards and offcuts. He must have smelled the pitch in August. The sweet, hot reek of the electric saw biting into decades. Next, the spaniel Moco. Moco, 1919. Poses on a small bench or table before a backyard tree. His coat is lustrous. The grass needs cutting. Beyond the tree, in eerie Kodak clarity, are the summer backstairs of Wheeling, West Virginia. Someone left a wooden stepladder out. Aunt Fran and obscured. Although he isn't this gent, he has a G belt buckle, a lapel device of Masonic origin, a patent propelling pencil, a fountain pen, and the flowers they pose behind so solidly are rooted in the upright length of whitewashed concrete sewer pipe. Daddy had a horse named Dixie Ford on Dixie, 1917. Ford on Dixie, 1917. A saddle blanket marked with a single star. Corduroy joggers, a western saddle, and a cloth cap. Proud and happy as any boy could be. Arthur and Ford fishing, 1919. Shot by an adult, witnessed a steady hand that captures the wildflowers. The shadows on their broad straw hats. Reflections of a split rail fence. Standing opposite them, on the far side of the pond, amid the snake doctors in the mud, Kodak in hand. Ford Sr.? And Mama, July 1919, strolls beside the pond. In white, big city shoes, purse tucked behind her, while either Ford or Arthur, still straw-hatted, approaches a canvas-topped touring car. Mama and Mrs. Graham at Fish Hatchery, 1919. Mama and Mrs. G sit atop a graceful concrete arch. Arthur on Dixie, likewise 1919. Rather ill at ease, on the roof behind the barn. Behind him we made out this cryptic mark, HVJM something there. Papa's Mill, 1919. My grandfather most regal amid a rack of cut lumber. Might as easily been the record of some later demolition. And his cotton sleeves are rolled to, but not past the elbow. Striped with a white neckband for the attachment of a collar. Behind him stands a cone of sawdust some 30 feet in height. How that feels to tumble down or smells when it's wet. Two, the mechanism. Stamped black tin. Leatherette over cardboard. Bits of boxwood. a lens. The shutter falls. The shutter falls forever, dividing that from this. Now in high-ceiling bedrooms, unoccupied, unvisited, in the bottom drawers of veneered bureaus, in cool chemical darkness, curl commemorative montages of the country's World War dead. Just as I myself discovered one other summer in an attic trunk, and beneath that every boy's best treasure of tarnished actual ammunition, real little bits of war, but also the mechanism itself. The blued finish of firearms is a process, control, derived from common rust, but there under so rare and uncommon a patina that many years untouched until I took it up and turning, entranced, down the unpainted stair, to the hallway where I swear I never heard the first shot. The copper-jacketed slug recovered from the bathroom's cardboard cylinder of Morton salt was undeformed, save for the faint, bright marks of lands and grooves. So hot, stilled energy. It blistered in my hand. The gun lay on the dusty carpet. Returning in utter awe, I took it so carefully up that the second shot, equally unintended, notched the hardwood banister and brought a strange, bright smell of ancient sap to life in a beam of dusty sunlight. Absolutely alone in awareness of the mechanism. Like the first time you put your mouth on a woman. Three, Ice Gorge at Wheeling, 1917. Iron Bridge in the distance. Beyond it, a city. Hotels where pimps went about their business on the sidewalks of a lost world. But the foreground is in focus. This corner of Carpenter's Gothic. These backyards running down to the freeze. Steamboat on Ohio River. Its smoke foul and dark. Its year unknown. Beyond it, the far bank, overgrown with factories. Our Whiteville house, September 1921. They have moved down from Wheeling. My father wears his city clothes. Main Street is unpaved, and an electric street lamp is slung high in the frame, centered above the tacked dust on the slack wire, suggesting the way it might pitch in a strong wind, the shadows that might throw. The house is heavy, unattractive, sheathed in stucco, not native to the region. My grandfather, who sold supplies to contractors, was prone to modern materials, which he used with wholesaler's enthusiasm. In 1921, he replaced the section of brick sidewalk in front of the house with the broad, smooth slab of poured concrete, signing this improvement with a flourish, W.F. Gibson, 1921. He believed in concrete and plywood particularly. 70 years later, his signature remains, the slab floating perfectly level and charmless between mossy stretches of sweet, uneven brick that knew the iron shoes of Yankee horses. Mama, January 1922, has come out to sweep the concrete with a broom. Her boots are fastened with buttons requiring a special instrument. Ice gorge again, the Ohio, 1917. The mechanism closes. A torn clipping offers a 1957 DeSoto Fire Dome four-door sedan, torque flight radio, heater and power steering and brakes, new WSW premium tires, one order, $1,595. 4. He made it to the age of torque flight radio, but not much past that, and never in that town. That was mine to know. Main Street lined with Rocket 88s. The dime store floored with wooden planks, pies under plastic in the soda shop, and the mystery untold, the other thing, sensed in the creaking of a sign after midnight when nobody else was there. In the talc fine dust beneath the platform of the Norfolk and Western lay Indian head pennies, undisturbed since the dawn of man. In the banks and courthouse, a fossil time prevailed. Limestone centuries. When I went up to Toronto in the draft, my local board was there on Main Street above a store that bought and sold pistols. I had once traded that man a Derringer for a Walter P.38. The pistols were in the window, behind the amber roller blind, like sunglasses. I was 17 or so, but basically I guess you just had to be a white boy. I'd hike out to the shale pit and run $10 worth of 9mm through it. So worn you hardly had to pull the trigger. Bored, tried shooting down into a distant stream, but one of them came back at me off a round river rock, clipping walnut twigs from a branch 2 feet above my head. So I remembered the mechanism. In the all-night bus station, they sold scrambled eggs to state troopers. The long, skinny clasp knives called fruit knives, which were pearl-handled watermelon slicers and hillbilly novelties in brown varnished wood, which were made in Japan. First, I'd be sent there at night only if Mom's carton of Camels ran out. But gradually, I came to value the submarine light, the alien reek of the long human haul, the strangers straight down from Port Authority headed for Nashville, Memphis, Miami. Sometimes the sheriff watched them get off, making sure they got back on. When the colored restroom was no longer required, they knocked open the cinder block and extended the magazine rack to new dimensions. A cool, fluorescent cave of dreams, smelling faintly and forever of disinfectant, perhaps as as well of the traveled fears of those dark, uncounted others who, moving as though contours of hot iron, were made thus to dance, or not to dance, as the law saw fit. There it was that I was marked out as a writer, having discovered in that alcove copies of certain magazines, esoteric and precious. And yes, I knew then, knew utterly, the deal done my heart forever, though how I knew not, nor ever have. Walking home through all the streets unmoving, so quiet I could hear the timers of the traffic lights a block away. The mechanism. Nobody else. Just the silence spreading out to where the long trucks groaned on the highway, their vast, brute souls in want. Six. There must have been a true last time I saw the station, but I don't remember. I remember the stiff black horsehide coat gift in Tucson of a kid named Natkin. I remember the cold. I remember the army duffel that was lost and the black man in Buffalo trying to sell me a fine diamond ring. And in the coffee shop in Washington, I'd eavesdropped on a man wearing a black tie embroidered with red roses. Black tie embroidered with red roses that I've looked for ever since. They must have asked me something at the border. I was admitted somehow, and behind me swung the stamped tin shutter across the very sky, and I went free to find myself mazed in Victorian brick amid sweet tea with milk and smoke from a cigarette called a black cat, and every unknown brand of chocolate and girls with blunt cut bangs, not even Americans, looking down from high, narrow windows on the melting snow, the city undreamed, and on the revealed grace, of the mechanism. No round trip. They tore down the bus station. There's chain link there. No buses stop at all. And I'm walking through Chiodaku in a typhoon. The fine rain horizontal. Umbrella averted in the storm's Pacific breath. Tonight, red lanterns are battered. Laughing in the mechanism. There comes a time you go ahead quick.
Okay, take one.
It says albums kind of crossed out, C.A. period Agrippa, 1 .10.110, order.
Some of you may wonder why we left that particular take of in the beginning with Penn Millette stumbling over things, doing that. And I realized Dennis and Gibson and I have all come to the conclusion over the last year and a half that to us the best thing that sums up the project are the rough edges of it, because frankly almost nothing's worked right along the way. There have been astounding problems from the initial graduate student hackers who were making the programs, who I along the way replaced with what I thought were professional, Silicon Valley's best heavy-duty computer programmers who've been doing this for 10 or 15 years. And they were frankly just as irresponsible as the graduate students. I mean, they answer the phone 9 to 5 and you can reach them and they're very reassuring, but they screwed everything else up too. So that's why we left that in. Laura and I talked about that in the beginning, but that sums up a lot the look of the piece, and really Gibson's attitude, and mine too, and Dennis's, toward technology and towards things like DNA codes and DNA scanning and computer programs, because in the abstract it all sounds, it sounds terrific, and there are good sides of it. And with Clinton's recent election, there's been a lot more talk about, you know, the new data highways and fiber optics and things like that. But the reality of those things, the implementation of them, are so much more complicated than just the technology existing. About 3 months ago, I was working on plans for the actual transmission to bulletin boards and to sites. That's before we decided to do what we did here, just playing off the disk. And a subsidiary of 9X was touting a new data transfer system that could zoom huge amounts of data anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, in pictures, and Dennis's pictures could be in color and it would all be perfect, and it would be cheap, and they could install it right in my apartment. And it sounded great. And they were even willing to donate some of the things to get them in museums. And then, as we were reaching the crucial stage, and I was already selling this great thing called Switch 56, which is a 56,000 baud data transfer system, to museums and places, they told me, well, that in fact, all the sites outside of New York, the local phone companies really didn't like this thing, and they didn't really trust it, so there was a 3-month waiting time for the installation, even though the installation only took a day. That none of the other phone companies, or the Baby Bells, or whatever they are, broken up things, really cared about installing Switch 56. So, in a sense, it didn't exist. Any other questions?
And Kevin, you said it's going over both walls and it's going on, correct? And you're not concerned about those people who will try to...
Gibson agreed from the start, understood that there was no way to completely protect this thing, that it was entering into different copyright realms. That's a big issue in electronic publishing. And since this is a short piece and a trial in a lot of ways, we just all agreed that that was inevitable. I mean, I expect people to be, Gibson's fans to be selling bootlegs of like a videotape of a fuzzy screen, or bootlegs of Penn Millette reading it, or bootlegs of Robert Ashley reading it. But that's a lot like, you know, rock and roll bootlegs. It's hard to tell whether they ever really hurt Bob Dylan lost any money from the fact that people sold hundreds of thousands of his bootlegs.
Which bulletin boards?
Won't say.
Did you use NEA money to do this?
No, no money from, no grant money at all.
Do you think this is a gimmick?
No, I don't at all. I mean, I think the actual object, to me, the actual object itself is, I'm proud of, and I know Dennis is proud of, and Gibson is proud of, and a lot of people doubted along the way that the book would ever exist. I mean, not necessarily in this form, but in that thing you see out there. And that's something that after this is all over, will still be knocking around and will be in some museums and places. So I don't think of it as a gimmick at all. I mean, a tremendous amount of work and money went into it on everybody's hands, but the fact that there were a lot of rough edges was us deciding that was the way it should be, instead of getting up and trying to make something perfect and seamless and flawless. That just didn't interest Gibson or Dennis or me.
I'm an electronic publisher. We do regular books.
Yes.
And I wanted to know, what do people feel about the structure and tone in this work? Why, in hypertext, we do hypertext things and regular things.
Yes.
And what was the particular things that made you say, well, I want this thing to self-destruct, I want it to pass through, rather than reading it forward?
Originally, when that idea came up, it was before the story was even written, and in the earliest stages, I just viewed it as a real commentary on some of the out-of-control greed in the art world and the repercussions of that. I mean, when the idea first happened, it was about 1.5 years ago, and everybody in New York was wondering, when the art world was going to come out of its doldrums and when people were going to be spending zillions of dollars again wildly. And I had been aware then that this was something that was going to, challenge that right on, with whether it was a collectible item, whether a museum would ever buy it or a serious book collector would buy it, but at least you had to think about it. You had to make that decision. If you loved the object, if you loved Dennis Ashbaugh's etchings, if you loved Gibson's writing, but the damn thing like self-destructed, it makes you decide what you're buying it for.
Who has bought the limited ones? Are they all individual collectors? Are there some?
No, a few museums. The Getty is buying one, New York Public Library. It's been a strange mix. I've gotten calls from people, an Army sergeant out in California called, who normally collects maps. Never read Gibson, never heard of Gibson, certainly never heard of me or Dennis Ashbaugh. But he bought 2 copies of the cheap editions because he wanted to play one and he wanted to store one away. There was another university professor in Nova Scotia who's actually writing an extremely dense sort of deconstructivist analysis of Agrippa for the South Atlantic Quarterly and presenting a paper at the Modern Language Association's meeting next January. And he also was not very concerned about reading other Gibson books or finding out about Dennis, and he just was approaching it as pure, philosophical question.
And where can you actually buy the cheaper edition?
In New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, their mezzanine gallery is selling it. And then it's mostly through rare book dealers and directly through me, people who sell artist books. There are a number of them here. And then around the country, it's mostly small independent bookstores that can special order it.
Will it be self-read or not?
We've been thinking about possibly doing a separate Japanese edition because there have been tremendous interest there. The story was translated into Japanese, but we haven't done that yet. And so far I've sold maybe 4 or 5 copies to people overseas in Germany.
We know you didn't write it, but the title, Agrippa, seems to suggest a reference to Imperial Rome,
Yes.
which I didn't tweet.
I, for the longest time, thought it was too, and I don't know, those of you who were here when Bill Gibson was here last month know that he has a very sort of self-effacing and quiet manner and an evident southern drawl from Virginia. And when Bill wrote the piece, I guess he had titled it and he was working on it before I actually saw a copy, so it was in the works for 3 or 4 months, and he told me and he told Dennis that it was called Agrippa, Book of the Dead. And I was sure it was a reference to the Roman Agrippa, or perhaps to the Agrippa in the Bible. And then Dennis found a book, a sort of weird crackpot black magic, and there was evidently also an Agrippa in